Well, hello, everybody. So nice to see everybody. By the way, I just wanted to say it was really great last week. I didn't hear a single phone go off, and so, you know, the good news is many of you will not be spending time in hell. That's good. Though I would like to mention that when you fall asleep in class, you will be probably headed for sloth in purgatory, so don't do that. All right, well, you already know, turn off your phones. The annual meeting will be Monday, May 20th. You probably already heard this like 18 times, so you probably really don't want to hear that again. The other thing that's really important, I think, is that the evaluations are available. So let's make sure that we fill out our evaluations. Some people are trying to get tenure around here, and we want to make sure that that they get that. So let's fill out our evaluations. And as I told my class, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. So, Ali, American theater players, readings from American plays will be Our Town by Thornton Wilder, Steel Magnolias by Robert Harling, Three Tall Women by Edward Albee, and a various and sundry selection of vignettes from Neil Simon. When will that be? That'll be Tuesday, May 14th from 11:50 to 12:30. You'll be at the beautiful Auburn Church of Christ in the Education Annex classroom. And why are we doing this? For your entertainment. So please support this. It should be a lot of fun, and I think that'd be a great thing to do. Now, today's class, well, from what I understand, we're going to talk about the War of the Roses. And, you know, one thing I know about the War of the Roses, and you may have heard this phrase before, it's good to be king. Well, during the War of the Roses, maybe not. The other thing that reminds me of the War in Roses is death and taxes. So if you're a king or a king wannabe, you're probably going to die. And if you are part of the local population, because of all the wars going on, you're going to pay a lot of taxes. So death and taxes make sense to me. Well, now it is my pleasure to introduce a man whose lectures will never bore you to death. They will never tax your patience. Oh, that was painful, wasn't it? That really, a man who is certainly no Lambert Simnel the Pretender. No, indeed. A man who is my liege, the king of the classroom.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. And as you know, it will soon be Mother's Day. And so in many ways, this is a Mother's Day lecture. We've got some mothers coming up. And they are some mothers that you will remember. Not necessarily the kind on the Hallmark cards, okay? I don't think you think of them that way, but they are definitely interesting mothers because of the power they wield through their offspring. And as Frank pointed out, we are going to be considering the Wars of the Roses because the late Middle Ages is definitely a time for old kings dying and new kings getting their throne. Although some of them are not very old, they do tend, as we shall see, to come and go. And for the purposes of this talk, I am, of course, focusing just on those who are involved here, and so I do have to skip through some parts of English history, and you will understand such as King Henry V or earlier King Edward I, simply because they are not part of this narrative. But the 5 that I'm concerned with are all those who will have relatively short reigns, or even when they don't, they will be unhappy reigns. I mean, you can be around a long time and not necessarily be happy. Those who are quite short will include, of course, poor King Edward V. And we all remember our favorite, what shall we call him, parking lot king, Richard III, buried now in Leicester. Well, he reigned sort of between 1483 and 1485. I'll give him 18 months as king. So some of these reigns are relatively short or not at all. We ask ourselves, why? Well, it's not to say that these categories are mutually exclusive, but children and incompetence basically summarize it. It's not to be expected that any of them are great stars or have lots on the ball, and this could have been a wonderful time. You know, Henry II or Edward I or Henry V or any of those that we would call from English history. These are all individuals who have some serious problems. One of them, of course, is that there are just too many men. And that is to say, too many men of power. It's often indicated, and the same thing is true in France, that these royal families produce so many males that, of course, one becomes king, that is, the eldest son of the eldest son, and then he's got brothers, he's got nephews, he's got all of them, and they, you know, they're all cute children. It's not that. It's just they grow up, and you know, I know how we all exchange the photographs and say, oh, just precious. Well, not, I don't know about for long, because then they get into the position of course, trying to take this king down. If he's strong, then he'll succeed. But in the case of these, we will see he is not. And then, of course, there is the question of the king not wishing to deal with what will be called the natural advisors. I don't know if you've ever seen that term before, but of course, as we'll see next week when talking about Parliament, these folks want a lot of attention. They are the great nobles. Now, we all have good friends, and kings are no exception. And that's fine, maybe, you know, the kitchen cabinets they used to talk about in terms of presidents. So it's okay for the king to have social friends, but when the social friends replace the great nobles, big trouble, big trouble. And these people are simply because of their status as children, or frankly because they just don't know how to rule effectively, they get wiped out. So, with that as an understanding, we start with one of the great losers of the late Middle Ages, and he is, you know, I went to his tomb, I enjoyed going there, I feel real bad for him, he had a hard time. And again, Mother's Day couldn't have been a happy occasion because the mother of his son, Edward III, certainly was not good to him, when maybe with reason. I don't know about that. In any event, Edward II, who gets a rather unfortunate portrayal in the movie Braveheart, in case you saw it, and I think that probably could have used some redirection, shall we say, basically was not effective as, by the way, he was the first Prince of Wales, if you ever, again, if you're playing games, trivia, and you could get some points on that one. Remember that, Prince of Wales, because Daddy took over Wales and made his son Prince. But Edward II was, even in his own father's eyes, pretty much a disaster. The campaign in Scotland, the relationship with France, which had been sealed with marriages on the part of both father, Edward I, who was a widower, and the younger, of course, Edward II to be. All of these were areas of concern when Edward I died in 1307, and he must have died thinking, I don't know what's going to happen. You know, it's not like you can say, you know, Eddie, you're really a terrible disappointment, and you know you've got a lot of hobbies. Let's get you working on your hobbies and have a good time, and let's talk to your brother, and maybe he can be king. Well, you know, that would have been nice, but you can't do interviews like that. I think the hereditary succession principle was in play here. So it's going to be Edward II. And as we all know, a terrible disaster. Speaking of ignoring natural advisors, Edward II did like to play favorites. This is a 19th century portrayal, in case you're wondering. And you're watching him with his buddy, Piers Gaveston. The name may give it away. He was from Gascony. And he's like best buds. If there was more, there's lots of debate about that. But whatever it was, Edward I had done everything to keep them separated. And the minute Edward I was out of the way, Piers Gaveston was back with the new king. See, they'd been friends when Edward was still Prince of Wales. And without Edward's father around anymore, he can have Piers there all the time. Of course, he had a wife. Both men had wives. Both men had children. But they spent most of the time together. Piers Gaveston with King Edward II. And they were best buddies. And you say, well, I guess that's fine. But it isn't if you're a great nobleman. Piers Gaveston was nobody. I mean, he just happened to be the king's favorite. The king gave him a title, which sounds good to me, Earl of Cornwall. Well, you know Cornwall, that's beautiful down there, don't you? Many of you all have been down there, Cornwall. Shoot, you get all those revenues, and you go around. And he was like a, well, I won't say a peasant, but he wasn't anybody important, and now he's Earl of Cornwall. You say, well, how did he get that? Because the king said so. Meh. So you can just take that, great noble. Just remember, I'm important.
Would you say they swung both ways?
I would say that has been written about quite a bit. How's this for weaseling out? I would say that still remains a matter of opinion. I suspect so. The letters seem fairly interesting, you know. But you can't, I mean, it's very difficult to ascertain. Again, I don't mean to be vague, but to be safe, I'm just going to say probably. But that didn't mean they weren't husbands and fathers. And for some years, Isabella, who after all was Philip IV's daughter and a great queen in her own mind, and because her father thought she was, and he may have had some questions, Philip IV, about that marriage, about, I wonder if this is a wise decision, but you know, everything is politics. Anglo-French relations. It was arranged by the recommendation of our old friend, Boniface VIII, the burn in hell Pope, yes. So he recommended, he said, y'all, this will all be part of a nice peace relationship. So they said, fine. So they were married, and for a while it went well. However, as the friendship between the king and Cornwall interrupted the authority of the nobles, which included members of Edward's own family, they finally decided to take action. And the action was to kill him off. So that was the end of the Earl of Cornwall. Yeah, I mean, he was sad. I mean, you know, it's like, I wish you all had done that. And now I don't even like you. You know, I just disliked you, and now I abhor you. I detest you, you know. Just go to Roger and get the thesaurus and think of more words for my odium. But the idea is it's not going to be good. Well, the long and the short is Edward eventually would find someone else. This individual was named Despenser, and Despenser ran the government, but unlike Piers Gaveston, Hugh Despenser was cognizant of how government works and had the power. His father had worked for Edward first, so he was very much a pro. Again, married with a family, so he just had Edward II under his power. So, as such, he's going to run his government in Edward II's name, and the letters are going to be about whatever you think best, Hugh. And you think, that doesn't sound like most kings. Well, no, I mean, very docile, very passive. And of course, the Queen, the mother of the future Edward III, is being left out. Because, you know, at first, you know, it was all lovey-dovey, and then he's not paying much attention to her. It's not a good relationship, and Daddy's dead. There's no more Philip IV. So I can't go running home, you know, to Paris. And so instead, she will arrange, and this is very crafty on her part. Her name was Isabella, known to history, written by men, of course, as the she-wolf of France. And that's not a good wolf, because, you know, in Roman history, we love the wolf, because you remember how they suckled the little boys? Nice wolf, nice wolf. But sometimes it'd be bad wolf, bad wolf. So this is the bad wolf category. So Isabella arranges to go to Paris. Her brother is now King of France. And she will go as her husband's representative. That's the plan. But you know it can't be true. through her duplicitous smiles. We know something's going on, and yes, there is. What happens when she is in France, and she will actually get control of her son there. She'll send her husband a letter. I've actually seen the letters. She'll send her husband a dear, my brother needs for little Eddie to come over. He loves his little nephew so much, and while we both are going to miss you awfully, we need to get this business taken care of. Your Isabel. And you say, oh, this is not good. No, it isn't. Because basically, sending over the child means that Edward II has already lost this particular struggle. Unknown to him at first, she's met somebody new. Yes. His name is Roger Mortimer. Roger was what they call a Welsh marcher lord. He had gained a lot of land in what you'd call the area between Wales and England. And apparently, Roger and Hugh Despenser Roger Mortimer became an enemy of the king, and he was exiled. So he ends up going to Paris. And I don't know, I would love to know whether he met Isabella at the French royal court. I mean, like hanging out. You want a drink, mon chéri? You know, that kind of thing. You know, you always wonder about those things. But Roger Mortimer and Isabella become more than friends. Yes. You mean, yes, I do. It's not, and then you say, but what about the talk? Well, that comes along too. He says, oh, I wish we could always be together. If this sounds like dialogue from a Lifetime movie, forgive me, but I don't mean it to be. But basically, he says, I wish we could always be together, baby. And he says, yeah, I really hate your husband. Yeah, I do too. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could be together and he wasn't in the picture? And you say, oh, yes, that would be wonderful. So this is a true story, though, as lurid and sordid as you can imagine. So this is rated R, okay? So this is strictly limited to adults, okay? So they brought then a sort of alliance against King Edward and Hugh Despenser, and they planned to take over. And so, luckily, she already had the son, little Edward, and Edward did fealty and homage to his father for the French lands. And so Isabella, now with her sinful Romeo, they take off with little Eddie. Yes, yes. I don't know what he thought about Uncle Roger when he stayed for breakfast. You have to ask yourself, how is the child gonna, but anyway, we mustn't worry about that. But now they plot for their future, a future that does not involve King Edward II, might I add. He's going to be out of the picture. Well, what they will do first of all is stop off in what we call Belgium today, Flanders, and arrange for the marriage of young Edward, too young to be fully married, but at least we can get an arrangement going, with the daughter of the Count of Flanders, who's no friend of the French. Because, you know, Flanders, France, right? Neighbors. So, I don't know. You know, it'd be interesting to know what the Count of Flanders thought about these lurid people. But anyway, whatever. They will continue on to England, where Edward II has little or no support. And you see the result. Poor Hugh Despenser is put to death by drawing, quartering, and burning. They wanted to make it complete. And of course, you know, everybody gathers around. You don't think they gave these executions, you know, say, oh, I'm just going to stay at home. I'm going to sort of miss this one. Like cutting class. No, it's not. No, everybody would be there that day. If not like many a Friday I've taught. Yeah, everybody, you see, they lined up. You get the best seats in the front, and then the peasants would have to sit and stand in the back, I guess. But they get them there, and that would be Despenser, and of course, now Queen Isabella, Mommy Dearest, and Uncle Roger, Roger Mortimer, will now rule in the name of Edward. I know what you're thinking. Did Edward II go into retirement? Well, you could call it that, I guess. This is Berkeley Castle. Been up there in Gloucester. That's when I got to see the burial site of the king. And you think, gosh, what a pretty place. Well, it is. You know, you can book it if you ever want to get married. You can book it and have your wedding party there and lovely receptions and all that. And I wonder if any of these folks would like for me to talk about Berkeley Castle during the reign of Edward II. And then I thought, I don't think so, you know. They probably are not interested in English history. But if they were, these happy couples, they would know that there were many horrible events that took place in the lower parts of the castle where the king was persuaded to abdicate through starvation or other methods, and then it is thought put to death. Now, if you want to believe Christopher Marlowe, the playwright, he was put to death in the most horrible way imaginable. And I know Carol has read that play, and it is a subject of some, that's why I just call it pitiful and horrid, but I think that gives you the idea. They didn't want any marks on the body, so they used the heated business, yes, in the act of sodomy. So all of this was to lead to his funeral, and the Queen and little Eddie were in the front pew there at Gloucester. Oh, yes, they went through all of this. Whether or not they were involved in the murder, again, is a fascinating story. But what we do know is that some claim the king could have lived and escaped, but most, I think, in this day and age, believe that he did die. And the Queen, with her accomplice, now will take over the government with the docile boy, Edward III, being the titular ruler. Please understand that she's now the grieving widow. And Eddie is just, Mommy, what is it you want me to do? Just do what Uncle Roger thinks is best, you know. And you say, and you know, kids are so sweet. They wouldn't say, but Mommy, are you sure this is right? I don't think they bring in the clergy for sermons on marriage and so forth. Well, you can tell by this 19th or early 20th century depiction that will last as long as little Eddie will do what he's told. And they can be cute and nice while they're young, but you let them get some age on them, and then you can forget it. They're going to do what they please. And one day, age of 18, this is a true story, the young king walks in, he says, Mommy, you're going to get a new home. Uncle Roger, your head's not going to be on your body. And that's the way he took over. He would take over the government of his own country, Edward III. You say, boy, I bet he would have to be on a couch a lot therapy, or maybe a lot of medication. I don't know. But back in that day, he became this incredibly successful king and this wonderful reign. His mother, and again, Mother's Day, and we like to think the children love us, and he looked after Isabella in retirement. She wouldn't need a boyfriend anymore. She would have more time for thought, and he came to see her, you know, special occasions. And she, I think she took some classes in knitting and things like that. Stay busy, you know, a lot of good habits. And because there's no more Roger. Roger's gone. And, but you can see, 1358, she had a long life, and he would continue on. So that is Edward II. Now, interestingly, our next poor ruler was Richard II. Had a good name, as in Richard the Lionhearted, but I'm afraid this is no such creature. Interestingly, Richard is one of those individuals who, were it not for the succession through the eldest male, would never have had to be king. His father was the distinguished warrior of the 100 Years' War, the Black Prince, and this was his only child. His mother, something of a first cousin, actually, of the Black Prince, was kind of a stage door mother and cared for him. He was, as I've said, the only child, and his government was run by the uncle, who was, I guess, the second son of Edward III, John of Gaunt. Well, all of this then is to say that until he was older, because he became ruler as a child, all of the uncles and his mother were telling him what to do, and I'm sure he was a nice child. He had been ruling about 4 years when the famous Peasants' Revolt occurred, and I'm sure he looked good. He was probably 12 or so. Yeah, and so, you know, you want to get the folks behaving, and they say, now you ride out there, Ricky, and show them that you're not afraid and that you love them and they're all good folks. And because they were nervous. You went to the Tower of London, they were all in their nobles, and all of them were in there scared to death. And of course they thought, you just go right, this little old boy in there saying, you ride out there and say hey to everybody, and they'll love you. Nobody will get you because you're the little king. You know, agents, PR people, you know, they're working it. That is his big moment as a young man. He lives on until 1399, but he never has a greatest moment after that. This is his big moment. Little Richard confronting the peasants, and they go, wow, you're so nice. We really like you. But of course, he's just a mouthpiece for these very frightened great nobles. When he gets older, of course, it will be a different story. But for right now, and you can see from the illustration, this incredible act of an individual who couldn't have been more than 12 or 13 going out. And you can see when one of his men actually did away, actually assassinated one of the leaders of the peasants, how that took place. I think all of this is done with him just out symbolically. I don't think he was of the age that he was directing it. He was told what to do, and he did it. There were lots of his family members because his grandfather, Edward III, had lots of sons. It just happened the Black Prince, his father, died back in 76. And now this has been some years, and all the other uncles are saying, now you do this, you do that. Yes, sir, yes, sir. You know, they're nice. They're just so nice when they're that age. It's just later. Because it will come the time when he is going to see things very differently. He's going to say, I'm king, you are not. So don't tell me what to do. What age is that, 13, 14? When they begin to get ornery and they're not nearly as cute. Yeah, the cuteness fades. That means that, in effect, Richard II, who seems to have been fairly contented under the guidance of his uncle, John of Gaunt, who was one of the great men of his day. You know, if John of Gaunt had just been king, probably wouldn't have a lecture today because he would have taken care of these issues. But he was just the chief advisor. And John of Gaunt had his own agenda. Gosh, he married the heiress to a large part of Spain, and he was off on campaigns. He had lots of things he wanted to do for himself, other than just trying to run England in the name of King Richard. Well, one thing that did happen was that they more or less had a ceasefire of the 100 Years' War. And that was a very, very important move, because it's ultimately up to the king to decide. And I think it had to do with the lack of enough resources. But it also had the effect of creating lots of extra nights around and people who don't have work anymore. Because remember, who's fighting? It's not the all-volunteer army, it's the knights who are fighting. And when there's not a war, they are available. All of this means that John of Gaunt, off away on other projects, Richard II asserts himself. He's got friends. And he disrespects, what is it they say now? Disses. You heard that? Our language. But anyway, it means in effect that he doesn't go to these people and say, well, what do you think I ought to do? I really care what you think. He said, I'm the king. He even uses analogies of the sun. Can you believe it? Yeah, he actually refers to himself. He talks about having his great-grandfather canonized. And you say, great-grandfather, you mean? Yes, I do, Edward II. He declares that he was a royal martyr. They say, medication may be on the way for you. But they don't have any of that back then. He is very, how you say, delusional about his ideas. He puts himself on the ballot for Holy Roman Emperor. He's got a lot of projects. And this all while, I guess he was in his 20s. And then John of Gaunt dies. And the effect of that is he doesn't really have anyone to sort of rein him in and says, now, little Ricky, I think maybe you've gone a little too far. Let's pull it back. His son, that is to say, the son of John of Gaunt, Henry, was in fact a powerful lord in his own right. He's the son of John of Gaunt, meaning they are first cousins. So the king, you with me? I'm not going to show any trees, but I'm thinking you would have clearly that their fathers had been brothers. And I'm sure Henry, probably every night when John of Gaunt gets home from running the royal government, don't you think he says, Dad, I wish you were king. You're a lot smarter than Ricky. Ugh, he is a disgusting little imp. And he says, now, son, Daddy loves you, and Daddy's going to always look after you. Well, this has to do with some beautiful lands you may know up in the north of England. Lancashire, all up there, that was their estates. So they were real comfortable. I don't want you to worry about them. They never had problems financially. Well, the king decides after John of Gaunt's death to take it all away. He views his cousin Henry as a threat. Basically, he exiles him. So, how bad can things get? Well, as far as Henry is concerned, he is a threat. Henry feels he is much more worthy to be king. He really resents his lands. That's not a smart thing for Richard to do, but Richard is so far gone by now that he'll do what he can do. For example, he will marry this little girl you see before you. I don't think it was true. It's not, let me emphasize, it is not romantic. Okay, I want to be real clear here. This is strictly political. Oh, and guess who she was? She is the younger sister of Henry V's wife. Think back. Henry V's wife. Remember she had Henry VI? But Charles VI, King of France, had extra daughters. And so he said, honey, remember when Big Sis went to England? You're going to get a trip too. And she said, oh, good, Papa. So off she goes. They never were truly married because obviously Richard will no longer be king by the time she attains womanhood. But she is sent over as a token wife. And remember, with a wife comes what else? Check. Yeah, because I don't want to ask anybody for money. I want to have my own. And he gets money from marrying this young woman. Now you see the truce in the 100 Years' War and why it could be valuable. I don't know what she did while Isabella stayed there in England. I guess she went to school. She probably had to take some courses in English. Yeah, embroidery, stitches, but also English. Yeah. I'm sure she had Latin, Carol. Don't worry about that. Don't you worry 1 minute. The future passive, every 5, all of the conjugations and declensions. All of this meant that, as I pointed out, the canonization, the election for king, he didn't win. But Richard had gotten some wild ideas about power and authority. And if you had said to him, and you remember, he's surrounded by cronies. And he's saying, do you all think I am the closest thing to God? And you know what? They're not going to say, sir, I think we need to really think through this. And they're all going, oh, sir, you're so smart. We love you so much. I mean, that's why we have people like that. They're there for love. Meanwhile, landless Henry is now off in France. And every day he says, I want my land. I hate Richard. And you say, not a happy Thanksgiving for that household. Because you can imagine the days are numbered. The reign is 1377 to 1399, so little Isabella, she's going home pretty soon. See, she just came to England in 1396. So, yeah, I mean, she's going to be going back. I don't think she even had an accent, you know, with her. I think she was really, really ready. 1399's the big year. King Richard, who may have been in a campaign in Ireland, comes back and is shocked to meet his cousin, that is, Cousin Henry, who's come back to France, and who announces that he is taking power. I call it a coup. I think it's a coup. They'll try to make it seem legitimate. But basically, Richard is just told, you know, you're under arrest. Please come with us. Now, of course, in the drawing, he's in full royal gear and all that. I would doubt he is quite that fixed at the time. But he is definitely taken, as they say on television, into custody. I always love that. Into custody. Oh, are you going to guard me? Thank you. So they keep him, and they begin a process of what I guess we would call in college world hazing, in which I think maybe he has restrictions on his diet. Now they would probably play music real loud or drive you crazy, hard rock or something. Yeah. But for those of us who come from other generations. But they must have just driven the poor soul crazier than he already was by saying, you should not be king. Repeat after me. You should not be king. And he says it over and over. And they're driving the man crazy. And they say, would you like for all the noise to stop, little Ricky? And he said, please. And they say, okay, just put your signature right here. We have a little statement. And they do. And the statements basically say what you would think they say. They go into detail, say, in effect, I abdicate this throne. I'm so unworthy. I'm such a loser. I mean, and it goes into all, it's like a lawyer's dream. Every phrase, everything. There's no way you can come back and say, that was a lie. I really think I'm very capable. No, 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 no. Right here in this clause, you said you wouldn't do this. So, more or less, after they got that, he was transferred to a northern facility. In that facility, according to press briefing by the acting government leaders, he died of melancholia. Yeah, it's sad. It was really sad. What had happened was that outside the facility seems to have been some pro-Richard demonstrations. And as long as he lived, they were afraid that would go on. So if they don't have anybody to demonstrate about, then that'll be even better. And he hasn't got any reason to live anymore. He's already signed all the documents, so we're free of that. So he's dead. That's 1399. And his cousin Henry will now announce that seeing there's no longer a ruler, gosh, I'm so sad. Cousin Henry seems to have passed away. And so, what do y'all think? Should we have a vote on who should be the new king? Well, sir, it would seem like you would be a wonderful shut your mouth. You really think so? So they go, hip, hip, hooray, Henry's the man. And you say, you mean, yes, I do, usurpation. Yes, he's nothing but a usurper. It's ugly, but it's true. And this will be, as all Shakespearean peoples know, the beginning of the Wars of the Roses and Henry IV. That was supposed to indicate his being crowned. And you think they're the Canterbury and York, the two archbishops. Don't you think they've seen, Lord, we're sorry, but our pensions. I mean, somebody's got to cover it, and our health insurance, you know. So, I mean, you know, because you think, how can they do that when, but, hey, you got to make sure about these things. Retirement can be tough without a pension. Yeah, so you need, they got that, they got him, and he's the new king. And he is king, and I mean, I'm sure there were people all around who were saying, we know how you became king, usurper. And he said, what'd you say? Nothing, sir. I'm sure there was a lot of sullen people. If you've ever seen or read the parts of Henry IV, part 1, part 2, you'll know how that story is and how interesting that is. At this point, let's take our break. Henry IV is now the king, and we understand some people consider him to be a usurper. And if you were trying, as a special way of remembering the course, you said, Judith would, I think, as a special tribute to the class, she'll be able to recite all the kings in order from, let's see, from William the Conqueror to Henry VII. Okay, maybe you can, I'll give you a week on that. So, no deadline today, but here is a little hint. The Lancastrians are Henry IV, Henry V, Henry VI. Okay, so that part can be very easy done. And of course, we all know, you may call him Laurence Olivier, but other people call him Henry V, and we understand the significance of Henry V. Henry IV founded the dynasty, and I'm sure he and Richard II had a lot of visits in the place below after he had some things to say in discussing their Uncle John of Gaunt and the fact that Henry had overthrown Richard. So I'm thinking there was no love lost there. So Henry IV, and most of us will remember Henry V because of his great fame in the Battle of Agincourt and all the rest. We're concerned, however, with that poor Henry VI, who inherited, remember, from his mother's father, we think, the genetic disposition for, and a form of schizophrenia perhaps, or some other debilitating mental disorder. I guess that's about the best you can say. That is Henry VI. He became king when he was very young. Well, a baby, really. Because remember, Henry V died of dysentery shortly after the young Henry was born. The governments of England and France, both under English control, were taken over by regencies. His mother was now free, so to speak. I mean, she had to look after Henry, and she did, but more or less the problem would grow as he was king. But as he was king and got older, he became interested in the arts. I think I've told you that he is very well connected with King's College, Cambridge, and the music there, but as king, I'm afraid he was rather dismal. He was basically begging for someone to run things, as long as they went to church a lot, because he was devoted to the church. And of course, you need to know Latin, wouldn't you? Because if you don't know Latin, you're going to miss out on a lot of the church action. So he knew plenty of that. Well, he still wasn't married, and the court was very concerned. Bachelor king, I don't think so. Not that he was a, what they used to call him, swinger. No, Henry was far from a swinger. If you want a Benedictine, nay, a Jesuit. Yeah, no. I mean, we're talking about someone who was into chastity. That's our Henry. No interest. They kept saying, you want a date? You want us to get some good princesses to come over and, you know, and kind of interview? And y'all, they said, no, I want to pray. I've got another service, and get back to me on that. We'll talk about it. So they were really, really very concerned. Finally, the marriage of the king to a young, I think she was 16, Margaret of Anjou. And he had been king a long time. This is 1445. She, like I say, 16, she never had a dream. I mean, you know, after all, her father was Count of Anjou, but she was a daughter on down the line. And to get Queen of England, pretty big deal. And she gets there and says, so, this is my romantic trophy. You know, this is not something out of a Harlequin, is it? Because he said, I got to go to Mass, sorry. What's this about a honeymoon? I've got services. You know, this is a feast day. You know, and she says, ugh, well, I've got problems. But Margaret catches on to the system apparently very fast. And she just, in a few years, she is really aspirational. She's very clever and very young. And with her husband, with devotion to the church, which entailed, I would think, a degree of great respect for chastity, and his other interests and his mental problems meant that very possibly, and again, this is speculation, very possibly she had other friends. Yeah. Not friends like somebody say, you want to get married, baby? And she says, no, this is just a long weekend. And you're thinking, oh, I lure it. Well, when you're the queen, I guess you can do that. In any event, she gets pregnant, and this is what everybody's waiting for. And you say, well, it's always wonderful when you're going to have a baby. But particularly if you're Henry VI, he needed a baby in the worst kind of ways. It was just that people couldn't believe that was really his. So you know how these chroniclers can sometimes question it based on Henry's lack of interest. It's so ironic, isn't it, when you consider his maternal grandfather and all of the other characters, but this guy, somehow, his wife got pregnant, can't tell you how, Margaret of Anjou, and she then had a son who would be named Edward. And this mother and son combination will be a very, very important part of this struggle that we call the Wars of the Roses. And we call them such because the House of Lancaster represents Henry VI, one rose. The other rose represents cousins of theirs, the House of York. The House of York that would want to take over the government if they could. Now, the empire, the Angevin Empire that we've loved and held, it's gone. 1453. Now, I know, Judith, you're thinking about the fall of Constantinople, and it was a big year. I hope a lot of you were with Judith on this one. Yeah. I mean, simply because she's Summa, meaning you can do well also. But you know that that's when Constantinople was taken by the Turks. But it was also the year the French took Bordeaux. Yeah. So if you get asked about 1453, you heard it here first. Remember that on the evaluation, okay? That I told you a lot about 1453 you never knew. Basically, I've always thought, what if you had been part of the establishment? I guess people were sad in a way. And believe me, if you got the idea that everybody in Bordeaux's running around going, Viva la France, and they're all, this is not 1944, people. They could care less. The people down there do not think of themselves as being French. That's the truth. They might have preferred the English because they had that great wine trade going on. And those French taking over. Ugh. Things changed. It's kind of interesting, though. But the English are out. The English will maintain their control of the port of Calais until 1558. But otherwise, it's over. At the same time, we now have a son, we think. Somebody's son, by Margaret of Anjou. And for Margaret, a reason now to maintain a struggle for a king whose mind is failing and who is losing control of the government. And basically, this is what I find so interesting. As he loses control of the government, she's sort of running it. And she's much younger. And she said, oh, I guess she's so busy with her duties as a young mother. I don't think so. I think we have people who do those things. So don't worry. The daycare service is working very well for queens. Meanwhile, however, she has competition. And you see impiously there, Richard, Duke of York. It's one of those pesky cousins. They, you know, he had an idea that Henry VI's mind keeps getting bad, and he can kind of step in and say, I want to help you, cousin Henry. You know what? Because I love you. I just want to help you. And you know how these helpers can be. They won't go away. And Richard basically is trying to take over the government. He was furious when he found out Margaret of Anjou was pregnant. Can you imagine? It may have been Yorkist propaganda that accused her of having dates. So we never know. In any event, Richard and Margaret were enemies. Henry's mind is not right. And so we have that interesting dynamic that the war creates. We no longer in the 100 Years' War. People need work. Not necessarily good work, but war work. And there's a lot of that. Because you have two sides. Those supporting Richard, Duke of York, and those that are supporting, frankly, Margaret of Anjou. I guess you could say they're supporting her husband, but he's really going to church most of the time. And she's there, think of Hallmark card, she's there for her son, little Eddie, to make sure he's going to get Daddy's crown. So Margaret of Anjou is quite the maternal figure. Richard does not make it, but his son does. And his son, who will become, according to many late medieval English historians, one of England's great kings. Unfortunately, he had a lot of, what do they call them, lifestyle habits that would cause him to die when he was 40. Yeah, I think he had long weekends. And he should have been behaving, going to church more. But he wasn't. And he took over. His father died. He was a Yorkist now. And he took over, continued the struggle against Margaret of Anjou. Edward IV. Again, you say, well, where's Cousin Henry? Well, he's there physically, but he's not there mentally. So this is really between the two of them. I don't mean they're going to fight, but I mean they both have armies. And she's doing all of this for her son, Margaret of Anjou. Very interesting struggle. And they drag all these people in, nobles. Sometimes folks, you know, as we'd say in the South, kissing cousins. They might be on different sides, but it's all a question of what's in it for us. It's not like rule Britannia. We're all doing this. This is not Winston Churchill, okay? So this is very much the two sides. And now Richard will be able to gain control of the government. In 1461, Richard makes himself, or I guess he has himself, a crowned king, announcing that Henry is illegal. And he will check in, that is, former king, or whatever you call him, let's just say Duke of Lancaster. He'll check into a suite at the Tower of London, and along with special clergy, yes, and a nice altar. Sheer chair. A lot of Our Fathers and Ave Marias and Rosary, great stuff. So he's taken care of. His son and his wife go to France. And Edward is now king. There's little Eddie. And you can just imagine Margaret must have said, now let's eat all your vegetables, because someday Mommy's going to see you to be king. You're going to be King Eddie. So aren't you excited? Because that cousin Richard is wicked and he's going to hell because he has Daddy in jail. I'm making this stuff up, but you get the picture of this woman this Margaret of Anjou that I just find so incredibly interesting. And actually, she'll be working France. Remember, she was French herself. There are lots of people who had been associated with the Yorkist side who become disillusioned with Edward IV. And she's going to be working this crowd, and you think, you mean they're, yes, they're venal. You can buy them. Yeah, she's going to offer them things. For example, she will actually, well, one of Edward IV's chief allies has a daughter. Margaret will arrange her son to marry his daughter. Yeah, you say, oh, there's nothing like teenage love. But again, I don't think the Queen was too worried about that as she was worried about useful contacts in terms of taking back the throne. And poor little Eddie, I guess he just went along and did what Mama said, which I think is, that's nice children. You know, maybe yours were like that. But now, meanwhile, someone had taken King Edward IV's heart, and there she is. Her name was Elizabeth Woodville. Elizabeth had been married before, and she'd been married to a supporter of the Lancastrians. Can you believe it? Opposites attract. Yeah. You think, wow, how would a nice Yorkist king meet a Lancastrian lady? Oh, kismet. I guess some crazy dating site got them together. But Elizabeth Woodville suddenly captured his heart. And this, the weird thing to me is, Edward IV had a way with the ladies. A real guy that all his friends, suddenly this woman, Elizabeth Woodville, married a widow of a Lancastrian, and there are lots of widows who are available, believe me, after they had plenty of veterans benefits and all that going on, Wards of the Rose. So, suddenly there is a marriage of Elizabeth Woodville and Edward IV. Why is this important? It's important because Elizabeth Woodville is another mother who would make our Hallmark Hall of Fame. Yes, she has, how you say, an agenda. If you've never seen some of these television dramas about Elizabeth and Edward, you will know that the Woodville family was, shall we say, extensive. And all of them wanted a romp through the trough. It was feeding time. And you say, well, what did they want? What you got? Insatiable greed was a characteristic of the Woodvilles. And for the upper nobility, they were what we call, to borrow from the French, nouveaux. They were not upper. And then somebody wants to be bishop, or I want my kid to get this and that. And you said, well, I'm sorry, but you're not really that qualified. He said, why don't you ask sis? And then everybody draws back. Yes. And if you don't, sis will tell her husband. Yeah. So the Woodvilles are very, very interesting, and the stories go that despite having to support all of these wretched people, even the Archbishop of Canterbury will be the Queen's uncle. It just kills me. I mean, I think we as Alabamians are always shocked by nepotism. Okay. Thank you, Carol. I needed that. I know, we all are just horrified by these ideas, so I don't want to keep you too shocked. There she is. Isn't that something? Boy, she had the power. And little Eddie, her husband, King Edward IV, and said, you know, baby, some people are opposed to you, but they're all losers. And she said, oh, thanks, darling. You really think I'm the one for you? Yeah, baby. So it's absolutely amazing to think of this couple. Meanwhile, Margaret of Anjou temporarily gains control back. They get the old man. Remember Henry VI is a guest at the Tower of London? Yes, the royal suite. Yeah. He checks out. And he doesn't know, I don't think he knows exactly where he is, but he comes out, he says, this is your wife and this is your boy. And so they sort of put him back on the throne. This lasts a few months between 1470 and 1471, while King Edward IV, who's a Yorkist now, remember? He's a Yorkist, and Henry VI is the last of the Lancastrians. You're going to remember all this when you get up tomorrow morning, and you'll be able to recite all of this, because this will all be on the phone. So it's fascinating, though, that they do take over, and she is just so happy, as you can imagine, during that interval while Edward IV, who is back in France now. Isn't it funny? It's sort of like they go back and forth. Now, Edward IV is trying to recoup to get control of the government again. And so he does so in 1471. More importantly, in battle, the young Prince Edward will be killed. He is the son of Henry VI, and so now Margaret of Anjou no longer has a cause. She just has a husband who doesn't know where he is. But he is there. So that's the way this particular story ends. Richard takes the throne back. Henry checks back into the tower, and Margaret is captured. Now, a broken woman, not to be melodramatic, but I mean, the whole deal was to get her son the throne, and now he's dead, which is what this particular romanticized 19th century picture is about. It shows the King Edward IV with the Prince Edward. Prince Edward, King Edward. Yeah. Richard. Now, at this point, we have the king back with the Yorkist king. Margaret, she'll be around a while longer. As a widow now, well, I mean, she's just no longer of use. I mean, her son's dead. They put Henry back in the Tower. And Margaret is shipped back to France, where she sort of lives on French charity. As far as Henry VI goes, they told this story to me when I took a tour of the Tower, and I always think, how do you know that? But I don't say that. I just think it, because, you know, it's their job. And they tell that he was reciting his prayers there in the Tower of London when they ran him through. But, as they always say, he died unnaturally, because they really, you know, you always think, why would they keep him alive anymore? He was finished, and he didn't know what was going on. So that's the end of him. And again, when you're reciting your kings, both of you, remember Henry IV, V, VI, end of line. Don't say any more. We're ready for Yorkists now, because now we are in good times. We are in Edward IV. and he is the king and a very successful one. Edward IV, as I've said, is a very successful king, but thanks to a lifestyle, and he loves Elizabeth Woodfield, his wife, but don't they call it a roving eye? He likes to date, isn't that what they say now? I don't, anyway, whatever it is, the man was out and about. I don't know how he got all of his royal work done. It's just, he must have been really well organized because he had lots of friends, gal pals, or whatever they call these creatures. Anyway, 40, that's all he made it to. And Elizabeth Woodfield, the queen, was now in charge. Now, notice, she had 10 children by Edward. And you think, gosh, she was busy with all of the maternal duties. I don't think so. I think she was busy with all those uncles and cousins saying, Lizzie, can you get me a job? Preferably one that does short hours and big wages. Yeah, that's what nepotism is all about. So, her eldest son by Edward will now be announced as King Edward V. Look at it. Oh, I know, it's a big awe. He was a member of the Order of the Garter, the chivalric order. Nice looking boy, isn't he? From the Woodvilles, the Yorkists, he could trace his line back to Edward III. Unfortunately, there were rumors, in part spread by his uncle, the later infamous, boo-hiss, Richard III. And what could be said about little Eddie? That the parents weren't really married. Oh, gasp. You mean yes. He's not legitimate. Well, gee whiz. If he's not legitimate, I guess he can't be king. Oh. If that is true, that would explain why Richard III, the ultimate villain, gets this particular rap. Is it mere naked ambition, or did he have legitimate concerns about the legitimacy of his nephew? I mean, you're a good kid, Eddie, but your parents weren't really married, so I'm sorry, you know? I can get you some great hobbies and other interests. Because Richard III, despite all of Shakespeare's talk, was a very successful nobleman, devoted to his brother. Maybe he just wanted to be king too badly. Whatever it was, the stories, of course, will come along that through his disapproval of the marriage, he believed they weren't truly married. See, they sort of, you know, it's all very romantic. Oh, tell them, Liz, we got married last night. Yeah, give me a big kiss, baby. You know, that kind of thing. And if you are part of the upper, I'm sure you're going, I wonder about that. What, do you have a receipt from some Days Inn? I mean, you just think, these things really do cause you to ask questions about legitimacy. And Elizabeth Woodville and her family of the Hog Association had really taken over a lot of the authority, so there was a lot of resentment. In any event, yes, the boys. What's that?
You got a whole lot younger.
Yeah, he was about 12, 13 maybe. But you know, the artists simply want to get the idea of very young and simple. And, oh, Uncle Dickie said to come for a visit. Oh, and we're going to get a room together, 2 guys hanging out. Oh, thanks, Uncle. Where's Uncle? He seems to be getting awfully quiet in here. Well, according to Shakespeare, and according to others, Richard, their uncle, will be responsible for the death of these 2 boys. And Richard will now be proclaimed King Richard III. All of this during 1483, which is kind of interesting when you think of it. It's a busy time. Very busy time. Now, are all the Woodfields dead? But no, no, no. Mama is alive and well. And she says, my brother-in-law is going to pay and pay big. And all of that will be accomplished through Henry Tudor and that particular episode leading to the first Tudor. And guess who Henry Tudor's wife is going to be? The daughter of Elizabeth Woodville. Yeah! Nepotism lives forever. Think about that now. Remember, you could be asked just specific genealogical questions in addition to dates. You need to have it all. Yeah, sorry. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you all next week for